After almost 60 years, a highly requested monster rematch is finally preparing to hit the big screen. Godzilla vs. Kong. King Kong and Godzilla are the two most iconic giant monsters in cinema history. Both of the original movies are on my top 10 favorite movies list. So, in celebration, I want to take a moment to talk about the original brawl between the two icons, all the way back in 1962. It's considered one of the greatest kaiju mashups ever and helped establish the Godzilla franchise moving forward from there. But the stories behind the movie are just as interesting, if not more so. So, let's take a look back at how the movie became the iconic landmark that it is. The idea originally began several years back as the brainchild of special effects master Willis O'Brien, the same man who worked on the original King Kong film with Marion C. Cooper and RKO in 1933. Only the idea was originally called King Kong vs. Frankenstein, in which the grandson of Dr. Frankenstein builds a giant monster out of the body parts of large animals, like elephants and crocodiles. Frankenstein is persuaded by the character of Carl Denham to make his creation into a sideshow attraction. To help boost sales, Denham once again takes Kong from Skull Island to be part of the show as well. However, the Frankenstein monster breaks loose and ends up running rampage during a stop in San Francisco, forcing Kong to take on the monster, leading to a climax on the Golden Gate Bridge. O'Brien drew up the storyboards and presented them to Daniel O'Shea, an attorney at RKO, hoping to get the rights to Kong to make the picture. O'Shea liked the idea and introduced O'Brien to John Beck, an independent producer best known for the 1950 film Harvey, starring James Stewart. Beck hired George Worthington Yates as screenwriter for O'Brien's treatment. It was fitting since Yates had a decent background with sci-fi monster movies. He wrote the script but gave the Frankenstein monster the new name of Prometheus, to avoid legal issues with Universal Studios, as it was believed at the time that they owned the rights to the Frankenstein characters, which is technically true. Universal only had the rights to the iconic Jack Pierce design from the Boris Karloff classic. But the creature from Mary Shelley's original novel was considered in public domain. Despite their efforts, no American studio was interested in the idea, finally forcing Beck to pitch the premise overseas instead. When he first brought the King Kong vs. Prometheus pitch to Toho, they were interested, but mostly in King Kong. The studio was already planning on bringing their own iconic monster, Godzilla, out of hibernation 7 years after his last appearance in Godzilla Raids Again. The thought of a brawl between King Kong and Godzilla would be huge, especially since Toho was getting ready to celebrate a major event. 1962 marked the Japanese film company's 30th anniversary. A total of 5 films were released to help commemorate the celebration. Mikio Narusei's Lonely Lane, aka A Wanderer's Notebook, Yasuki Chiba's Born in Sin, Hiroshi Ingagaki's 47 Samurai, and Akira Kurosawa's Senjuro, the sequel to his box office smash Yojimbo. Gojira director Ishiro Honda was chosen as the director of the 5th film, King Kong vs. Godzilla. When Eiji Tsuburaya, the special effects master behind the original Godzilla suit, got wind that King Kong was coming to Toho, he was beyond ecstatic. Cooper's King Kong was a huge inspiration on his work. In fact, Tsuburaya originally wanted Godzilla to be stop motion as well. However, no one in Japan was experienced with that kind of animation, and even if they were, he figured that the process to complete the film would take up to 7 years. It was an impossible task, seeing as Toho had only given the original Gojira movie a deadline of only 3 months. So, Tsuburaya had to settle for a man in a rubber suit instead. Now, the creature that inspired Tsuburaya would be coming to Japan, and the very thought of creating his own version of Kong to take on his own creation of Godzilla was too big to pass up. But while the studio was thrilled about the film, Ishiro Honda was less enthused. He was concerned about the image of Godzilla becoming less about nuclear destruction and more like a character wrestler. It would be degrading his efforts from the first film. The studio thought it would be interesting to make these two monsters fight. That was all there was to it. Still, when you're the director, it's your film, so you still have to do your best. So I sucked it up and worked as hard as possible. But the price tag was steep. Toho reportedly had to cough up 8 million yen, or approximately $220,000, just to purchase the rights to Kong. This forced Honda to cut locations and production costs. Since the movie wasn't really going to focus on the problem of nuclear activity, Honda decided that the movie should address another issue that he found concerning: television. Throughout the 60s and 70s, the popularity of television was crushing movie sales. Why go to the movie theater when you could be entertained right from the comfort of your own home? Even Toho created their own television department, as movies didn't seem to be making much money anymore. Many filmmakers transferred over to the department just to find work. But Honda's main concern was the brutal media war between the various networks, and the ridiculous content that they were producing. One of the most famous examples was a 6-man wrestling match between Japanese champions Riki Dozan, Great Togo, and Toyonobori against American champions Freddie Blassie, Mike Sharp, and Lou Thez. There's no footage of the match online at this point, but it is said that during the match between Freddie Blassie and Great Togo, Blassie bit his opponent in the forehead, opening a horrible gash. The very sight of Togo covered in his own blood was said to be so gruesome that several elderly men watching the match died of heart attacks. Honda frowned upon the network executives sponsoring outrageous programs and stunts just to grab the audience. People were making a big deal out of ratings. But my own view of TV shows was that they did not take the viewer seriously, that they took the audience for granted. So I decided to show that through my movie, which is why he was glad that Shinichi Sekizawa was hired on as the writer for King Kong vs. Godzilla. Sekizawa had worked with Honda on various movies such as Varan the Unbelievable, Battle in Outer Space, and Mothra, but he also had experience in television, which is why Honda considered him a valued resource. The reason I showed the monster battle through the prism of a ratings war was to depict the reality of the times. When you think of King Kong just plain fighting Godzilla, it's stupid. But how you stage it, the times in which it takes place, that's the thought process of the filmmaker. Back then, Sekizawa was working on pop song lyrics and TV series, so he really had a clear insight into television.
コングのやつやっぱり旗色が悪いぞ。指揮長、おいしっかりしてくれよ。
Finally, after months of hard work, King Kong vs. Godzilla was released in Japan on August 11, 1962. The story begins with the announcement that the polar ice capsules are melting in the Arctic, causing the ocean levels to rise. A military sub is sent to investigate the problem and ends up uncovering Godzilla. Godzilla breaks free of his icy prison and travels back to Japan to create havoc. Meanwhile, in an attempt to boost their ratings, a major television network sends 2 of its employees to a mysterious island in the southern hemisphere to investigate a rumor about a mythical demon god. They find King Kong on the island, and the network director believes that he can benefit from the beast if they force him to fight Godzilla. But that is easier said than done. Many actors who would go on to be kaiju alumni were cast in the film: Tadao Takashima, Kenji Sahara, Yu Fujiki, Akihiko Harada, Jun Tazaki, Akiko Wakabayashi, and Mie Hama. Both women, especially Hama, would later reach superstardom as Aki and Kissy in the James Bond film You Only Live Twice, alongside Sean Connery. But for now, in King Kong vs. Godzilla, Hama was setting another milestone. Throughout cinema, Kong's preference of women seems to lean more towards white blondes. As of 2021, Hama is the only Asian actress to win over King Kong's affection. Of course, you can't have King Kong without taking advantage of some of his tropes, like having him fall in love with a woman or having him scale an iconic building, in this case Tokyo's Diet Building. But King Kong wasn't the only movie this film took inspiration from. The moments between Sakurai and Faru on Faroe Island were inspired off of Africa's Screams with Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, as well as the Road 2 franchise starring Bing Crosby and Bob Hope.
Is that the way all the natives dress on your island? Really? George, you suppose? Not a chance. Stick around, folks. He could be wrong, you know.
These two aren't as funny as those other films, but I can see the inspiration. The movie does eventually deliver on what it promises, it just takes a while to get there. For about 2/3 of the film, the monsters are just running rampage on their own, taking on the military in the process, which feels like a drag since we all know that nothing that the military does is going to stop these creatures. When the battle finally happens, it does feel like a wrestling match rather than two giant beasts responding with animal-like instincts. They use every effect they can manage for this battle too. Rubber suits, puppets, and Tsuburaya finally got to experiment with a little stop motion. As I said before, the rights to King Kong ate up most of the financing for the movie, and at times it clearly shows. The Godzilla suit looks okay from its profile. From the front though, even as a kid I thought it looked weird. The King Kong suit, on the other hand, looks horrendous. It's like an actor put on the fur coat of a road-killed orangutan. Thankfully, Tsuburaya and his team would get a chance to make another Kong suit for the film King Kong Escapes in 1967. At least that one looked better. They also needed to change a few things in order for both Kong and Godzilla to be evenly matched, most notably their sizes. The original King Kong was said to have been 24 feet tall at most, while Godzilla's size varies between approximately 164 feet to over 400 feet, depending on the version you watch. So King Kong definitely needed a growth spurt just to look Godzilla in the eyes. Godzilla's skin is also indestructible, and he can breathe fire, so the movie added the discovery that Kong can actually be empowered by electricity, something they took from the Frankenstein monster in the original script, while electricity actually hurts Godzilla this time around. We have seen Godzilla unfazed by electricity in the original film, so it's clear that the change in this movie was an ploy just to give King Kong a certain advantage. Also, the American version acknowledges that Kong's brain size is much larger than Godzilla's, making Kong the superior of the two in terms of wits. Out of all 5 banner films for Toho's 30th anniversary, King Kong vs. Godzilla was obviously the most financially successful. To this day, King Kong vs. Godzilla is the only Toho Godzilla film to surpass the original in terms of ticket sales in Japan. Masaki Tezuka remembered seeing the movie as a child and becoming inspired to be a filmmaker himself afterwards. It was such an entertaining film. The house was packed, you know? We could barely get a seat. Everyone involved with the film considered it a victory. But for Willis O'Brien, the movie was a stab in the back. Throughout the entire process, producer John Beck had failed to keep O'Brien in the loop. O'Brien would often call up Beck for updates, and Beck would assure him that he would be notified the moment anything was greenlit. Beck took all the glory, while O'Brien got next to nothing. Not even a credit. A lawsuit was filed in 1962, but later dropped due to attorney fees. O'Brien died of a heart attack that November at the age of 76. His widow went on record saying that she absolutely believed that King Kong vs. Godzilla played a key role in her husband's death. Another lawsuit was filed by Marion C. Cooper, the director of the original King Kong. He believed that he was the sole owner of the character and that Beck and RKO were illegally selling rights that didn't belong to them. Cooper lost the suit due to lack of evidence. When the film was released in the U.S. on June 23, 1963, again, additional scenes were added with American actors, most notably Michael Keith as UN reporter Eric Carter, who treats the movie like an actual news broadcast, interrupting the story now and again to comment on so-called live updates and current events. Many Japanese scenes were cut from the English version too, most focusing on comedy bits with Ichiro Arishima, who plays the head of the television network that sponsors King Kong. As a result, a lot of comedy in the English version comes off a bit drier. The film was distributed in the US through Universal, which would explain why a lot of music from their older films were recycled in it. many years, there was a popular myth about the movie which most of you know already. The rumor of the two endings. But where exactly did this rumor originate? In the early 60s, there was a short-lived magazine titled Spacemen, which supposedly gave everyone the quote-unquote inside scoop on current science fiction movies. In issue number 7, there was an article on the upcoming King Kong vs. Godzilla film, in which Spacemen says the following. Does King Kong best his saurian adversary, or does Godzilla prevail over the mammoth ape? Spacemen lets you in on a secret. 2 endings have been filmed, and if you see King Kong vs. Godzilla in Japan, Hong Kong, or some oriental sector of the world, Godzilla wins. On the other hand, in the USA and England, for instance, Kong wins. Nobody knows where Spaceman magazine got this information, but the article quickly ignited the speculation that King Kong vs. Godzilla had 2 endings to satisfy fans on either side. And since the Japanese version wouldn't be seen in America for several decades, the myth was strongly believed well into the new millennium. The only real difference about the ending is that, in the Japanese version, both monsters roar to close out the film like a curtain call. In the English version, only King Kong roars. Even Toho made a public statement saying that King Kong was the official winner. I'm not going to rate the movie because it's a difficult one to place a star rating on. The quality is low, but that's what makes it entertaining. You basically have to watch the film with the right mindset. Despite its flaws, though, it remains one of the most iconic monster mashes in cinema history. It basically began the trend of monster brawls that the Godzilla franchise and many other kaiju movies are now known for. For that reason alone, this is a movie to be respected. Guys, thanks again for continuing to watch my videos. It really means a lot to me. And if you like this, you can click here and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.